Well, yes. First, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this evening, especially, during the week, 7 o'clock, busy time. So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to sit and listen to our discussion. We're very honored to have Vice President for Issues in Action, Lynn Teague, Vice President for Issues in Action of League of Women Voters, to discuss this with us, as well as the chair of our organization, Carolina for All, Lawrence Moore, which I will go ahead and let him discuss a little bit about what Carolina for All is and what we are doing now with our current absentee voter project. Lawrence?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sarah Emily. Yeah, this Carolina for All is an organization that grew out of progressive activity around our revolution. We've actually been organized in the state since, we had our paperwork and everything from the Secretary of State's office since 18, and we started working to develop this in 18. And also we a 501c3 organization, and basically we do things to educate people. Our main concern is working issues like social justice issues. We are also concerned about voting and educating people about the process, and so we appreciate the opportunity to provide the service to everybody. Like everyone else, I'm concerned I want to make sure that I have the proper information. So when I go out Saturday, when we doing voter registration and people are asking us the questions, we understand exactly where we're at now, and we can give them, definite and concise answers. And also we can tell them when there are no answers. We just have to wait. And I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you for organizing this.
Sarah?
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Okay. I'm sorry, I lost Sarah Emily. I didn't. Are you there? Well,
Can you hear
I'll
me?
go ahead. No, I didn't. You want me to introduce Lynn? You had already. Lynn, you want to go ahead and give us some information and the reason we're here today?
Hello?
I can just jump right in if you want me to.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, for those of you who don't know, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, very nonpartisan organization. We're 100 years old. We grew out of the women's suffrage movement. And the whole point was that now that women have the vote, let's use it well and use it to educate all voters and to help all voters. And for a very long time now, we've also accepted men in the organization, but the decision was made not to change the name because so much of our legacy is in the suffrage movement. So we basically do two kinds of things. One is advocacy and the other is voter services. And in terms of advocacy, we have been working very hard for several months trying to get, we always work on election issues and voting access issues. And we've been working very hard trying to get measures needed to ensure the safety of voters in this year when we have, of course, as everybody knows, a pandemic in the country. And this makes things more dangerous for some people than others, but at some level of risk for virtually everyone. So that has been a big concern of the leagues. And we have worked for things like expanding access to absentee voting and for a number of specific provisions that we thought would enable voters to meet our goals, which are safety, security, and accessibility of our voting process. Mm-hmm. So everybody, I think, learned during the primary what expanded absentee means. And we did get that finally for the general election. The General Assembly does nothing before its time, and it took its sweet time getting around to passing expansion of absentee balloting for everyone for the general election. And, you know, we often think of that as the November 3rd election, but more realistically, we can say that's an election that's basically starting at least by October 5th. So we're very close. But the bill that passed through affecting the general election was, they did what they call a strike and replace. They took a bill that already existed and took everything out of it and put in a new bill. And that new bill expands absentee voting to all eligible voters. You no longer are bound to the 18 specific criteria that normally apply to have access to an absentee voting option. And it allows more time for election officers to count the ballots. That's really, really important, because we know that there's going to be a huge increase in absentee balloting, and especially by mail. And so they're going to be given 3 days instead of 1 day to process those ballots, although they can't count the ballots until the votes until election day. They can start processing absentee ballots. State Election Commission reports that, you know, by last month, they had already many more applications for absentee than they had in the entire 2016 election. So what does this mean? What's the best choice? And I think the answer is there's no best choice for everyone. The obvious danger of the usual process of going, which is what I've normally done, go on election day, go to your polling place in your neighborhood and vote. And in this case, using the new ballot marking devices that the state has bought this year. And the problem now is, of course, that risk contagion in a pandemic. And the State Election Commission, the county election workers are all working very, very hard to make this as safe as they humanly can. Doing things like, you know, sanitizers, requiring distancing, requiring masks, and so forth. But still, we know that the virus can be airborne, can be aerosol, can linger in the air for some unknown period of time. For people with compromised health especially, this is a huge danger. So everybody has to make their own decision. What are your options if you really don't want to risk being in a crowd for a lengthy period of time on election day? And there is, of course, that's the real danger. You can't count on just walking in and voting. You could end up in a line for some period of time. There are two other options, and we think both of them matter a lot, and everybody needs to think carefully about what works for them. One of them is to vote by mail, and that's the one that's gotten the most discussion. But for many people, early in person is going to be a better option. But let me step back here a little bit and just say that the first thing everybody needs to do is to make very, very sure they're registered. And I gather that Carolina for All is probably planning to do some work on this. The League of Women Voters obviously always does voter registration work. But we need to know that if you're going to register in person for a general election, you need to do that by October 2nd. The deadline to register, if you're registering online, which thank goodness is an option in South Carolina, but you need to do that by October 4th, or if you do it by email. October 5th, you have to have any mail-in registration postmarked. So we are moving up here very soon on the deadline for voter registration.
I'm sorry, I missed that last thing you said because it kind of got garbled.
Okay, October 5th.
5th, what's happening? October 5th, that's a Sunday?
That's the day when you have to have your ballot, your application, your registration form postmarked if you are mailing it in. But there's really not much reason to mail it in because you can do it online. And one thing that is a big concern of ours is that South Carolina has a great online system for voters. But there are 500,000 South Carolinians who do not have good broadband access. We know that this has been a big issue with education in the state. There are a lot of safeguards that you can take advantage of online if you have internet access. And one of the easiest way to register to vote is to simply go to scvotes.gov, and that will allow you to do it right there online. And so if you do it that way, you need to do it by October 4th. And if you're already registered and if you have been voting consistently, you still need to check your registration. Now and then, it's a computer file. We all know what computer files are like. They're not always right. So be sure and check that your registration is current. You have time right now to fix it if there's a problem, or if it doesn't have a current address on it. It must have a current residence address on it. But you've got plenty of time to fix it now if you do it now. So first priority is to make sure you're registered. But once you've done that, then you have to make that big decision. How do you want to vote? So, okay, general election, everybody's familiar with that. But voting absentee is something a whole lot of people have never done. I had never done it until the primary this year, because I usually just go down to my local polling place and vote. But this year, I am not as young as some people are. I don't, thank goodness, have any major underlying conditions, but I felt it was safer to vote by mail. But for many people, voting early in person is going to be a better option. If you don't have internet access very easily, and your health is decent, and you're not too worried, you know you can take precautions, voting early in person is a great choice. And it's one that we're going to be sure that people in rural areas with poor broadband are aware of. Because if you have internet, you can check and make sure that your application for a mail-in ballot was received. You can see when they got it. You can see when they mailed it. You can see if you have, when you've mailed it back in or turned it back in, you can see that it's been checked in or not. And that gives you an opportunity to fix problems too if one occurs. But if you don't have internet access, you're pretty much in the dark for tracking your ballot unless you want to call the election office regularly. And most people don't want to do that. We know that a lot has been said about flattening the curve with the COVID-19 in terms of hospitals and access to medicine and so forth. But we need to flatten the curve for election offices too. Everybody should not do everything at once. You know, if you want to vote by mail, go ahead and apply for it now. For that, send in your application for the ballot. If you want to vote in person, you don't have to do any real preparation ahead of time, but plan that. Plan your vote, make a decision. And if you vote early in person, do it fairly, not on the first day probably, because we discovered in Virginia that was a very, very busy day. But plan on going before late, before the procrastinators jam the places. And, you know, if you're in Richland County, we know that Richland is going to have a number of satellite election offices where you can go and vote early in person. We don't know exactly how many, because it turns out there's been a glitch in acquiring the e-poll books that were supposed to come in. And I won't bore everybody with the technical details of that problem, but we will soon know how many satellites are going to be. scvotes.gov is going to have the information of where those satellites are and where the election, early in-person elections are going to be. They're going to have the hours. They will have all the information you need to make a decision on that. But, you know, again, not necessarily the first day, but try to take care of it early. If you decide to vote by mail, make sure you do it right. You don't want to be one of the people whose ballot is thrown out. And what does it mean to do it right? That's been changing, and we still don't know for sure. what that answer is going to be as we move forward. When you get your ballot back, it will have 2 envelopes. There's a security envelope and an outer envelope. You will need to sign where it says to sign. You need to get a witness signature. Now, Judge Childs in Federal District Court recently ruled that we did not need the witness signature. For many years, the director of the State Election Commission has made the point that it's not useful. Witness signature does not actually give any added security, nor is it needed. There's a lot of security around mail-in voting. This is just an extraneous requirement. However, as of yesterday, that decision by Judge Childs has been appealed, and it was appealed by a, as I understand it, not entirely unanimous vote of the Election Commission. And so that's going back to court. We don't know, but until we know, while exposure to someone to get a witness signature is, for some people, a serious problem, we have to advise everybody to get that signature. If you get your ballot and you're ready to send it in, make sure you have a witness signature. It may end up not being needed, but if a court decision comes down 2 weeks from now that it is needed, and people have gotten their ballots and have started sending them back, and they don't have that signature on there, they may be thrown out. A court would presumably deal with that eventuality, but there's no reason to risk it. So one of the things you want to do is also be helpful to people you know who are shut-ins or whatever, to get that witness signature. In the past, very often people have gotten it from their postman, and now the current director of the U.S. Postal Service has prohibited the postman from signing as witnesses on ballots. So you have to find a different option. And then you need to figure out how you're going to return it. We all know that the mails are slower now than they were. We cannot wait till the last minute. And you really should expect to get your ballot back as soon as possible. And you can do that by mailing it very early, the usual postal service system, or it can be delivered. And normally you would do that yourself. You cannot take it to your polling place on election day and try to turn it in that way. They can't accept it. But you can take it to the election office or to one of the satellite early voting centers and turn it in. And so,
excuse me, nope. We have an inside person inside the Election Commission, and you cannot bring that mail-in ballot. You can't drop it off, and they're not accepting it at satellite. They're still discussing it. It's still in flux situation. So I would bring it to.
oh, okay, yeah. Well, the safest thing is to take it straight to the county election office.
Right.
And yeah, a lot of things are in flux, and how is the law to be interpreted? And you know, they should have asked some of us who spend a lot of time answering questions about this stuff when they wrote it, but they didn't. So there we go.
Well, I got on there, I wanted to ask a question about that. Our inside person says the deadline for receiving an absentee ballot application has been moved up to October 24th at 5 p.m.
Right, that's another provision of the law. So you must apply for the mail-in ballot, the absentee ballot, by October 24th. Again, you don't have to do any preparation if you are going to vote early in person, but you really got to plan it if you want to get that mail ballot. So
Right.
Yeah, the normal deadline is later, but it's October 24th. Get that application in.
And then the inside person said we cannot place drop boxes outside of a satellite location.
We can't put them anywhere. We can't put them anywhere. We used to, yeah. What the State Election Commission asked the General Assembly to do, and the League of Women Voters strongly supported, was enabling the election offices to put drop boxes at not only the main election offices, where they have had them for years in some cases in some counties, but also the satellites, and then ancillary safe, secure locations like, for example, police stations. And the General Assembly said no, and not only did they say no, they said you cannot even do what you've done in the past, which is to have a drop box right there at the election office outside. That means it has to be a human being inside, an election official, who will take your ballot from you and supposedly check it, which, you know, if you were mailing it, there'd be nobody to check it before you stuck it in that mailbox. But there's going to have to be a check by a person. The good news is that the larger counties that face real problems with crowds and so forth do plan to designate individuals to handle that. So there would be someone whose only task was to take those ballots. If you brought them in, you would not have to be in line with everybody who was doing full-scale early in-person voting. And this brings us to another really important subject, which is, what if you want somebody else to turn it in for you? And the league that's quite possible. You can authorize a person, when you get a mail-in ballot, it comes with a form that's necessary to authorize someone to turn in your ballot for you. If you decide to go that way, make sure you fill out that form. But the main thing to be careful of is who you hand it to. Do not hand your ballot for turning it in into anybody that you don't know. We know that in the past, there's a gentleman in North Carolina who's got a felony on his record for taking ballots and not treating them as he should. So we really are encouraging everyone to only have people they know and trust turn in their ballots. Not you know, and there's a thought, and the league has been asked, what about just organizing an effort to send people around to volunteer to pick up people's ballots? That can go wrong so very easily. You know, if you have strangers taking it, what happens then if somebody claims that they gave you their ballot and they didn't? You know, you cast doubt on the whole process, as well as getting yourself into a very difficult situation. So we strongly encourage people to work with people they know.
Yeah, I want to, I had some people raising their hand for a question, and yeah, Pam, would you go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. When people aren't on broadband or they don't have internet, how are we getting this information to them about authorizing another person to do this? It sounds very difficult.
Well, it's a process where a number of things could go wrong, and we know that in every big election, even without the pressure on mail-in that we're going to have with this pandemic, lots and lots of ballots get thrown out. This is a big concern of the leagues. We were offered a grant, which, you know, anybody who really knows the League of Women Voters knows that nonprofit that's us. We don't have money. But somebody offered us a very generous grant, and we are spending it on radio station ads in areas with poor broadband. And we're starting with registration information, and as soon as the registration period's over, we're moving to more detailed information about why you should vote, why it's important, but also how. And it truly is a problem. The bill that the General Assembly passed charged the State Election Commission with doing a major educational effort for the public. But most of that education is online. And frankly, most of the League of Women Voters education is usually online. We have Vote 411, which is a fabulous resource for people who have internet access. But useless to anybody without it. So we're trying to use radio to get to people. We're going to have person-to-person contact in many cases. And so we know that organizations across South Carolina are concerned and are sending people out.
Can you work through the churches?
We have outreach to some churches, and we know that other organizations have outreach to churches. And one thing the League of Women Voters is doing, because our own reach is fairly limited in that we have 12 branches around the state, but they're big areas where we have no branch at all. And we don't have huge numbers of members. And so we have been coordinating a partnership, and that's how Carolina for All got in touch with us, becoming part of that partnership for organizations to get everybody to get information as soon as possible and to do what they can do to reach out. So what, for example, AARP can do is very different from what Able South Carolina might do, which is reach out to people with disabilities, or the Link are one of the groups that we reach out to here, or the Coalition of 100 Black Women.
Yeah, is Able helping you, or are they too small?
Oh, they're very active on this.
Okay,
they're
good.
active in advocacy, and I think they're active in trying to get word out to their constituency.
Okay.
Because they have special issues. And one of the things that we discovered in the primaries was people, with consolidation of polling places, there were big lines in some places. And people decided they would avoid those big lines by simply getting in the drive-through line for people with disabilities. And how's an election worker to say, you don't look much like you have a disability? And so people with actual disabilities were being held up for immense periods of time. So they've been very concerned about getting good information out and getting their folks engaged on what their choices are. And so we have people coming at it from a lot of different directions, a lot of different areas. And we hope that all of us working together can have the kind of broad outreach we need to get people to vote, and to do it in a way so that their vote really counts. It's really a shame that it's as complex as it is, but in some ways it has to be. One thing, we hear these things about voting by mail being insecure, and that's simply not true. It is, for example, as has been suggested, not even remotely possible for somebody to simply sit there and run off a couple of million extra ballots and hand them out. First of all, it's very hard to get the right ballot to everybody. If you go online, you see what's your ballot going to look like. You can go to SC Vote. You'll see what your ballot looks like. There may be 5 different ballots being given to people in one polling place, depending on where all those intersecting boundaries are of everything from school districts to senatorial districts for the state, to congressional districts, all these lines differently drawn. You can't just generate a bunch of random ballots. And then, of course, there is the connection to the registration. The real countable absentee ballot is only going to be sent to the address where you're registered. So they're much more secure than has been claimed. However, a lot of noise has been spent on casting doubt on mail-in ballots. And one of the important things everybody needs to understand is, what can you expect on the night of November 3rd? I strongly suggest a glass of good wine and going to bed early, because you're not going to get the election results. With this massive mail-in voting, it's never true that all of the elections are reported immediately or resolved immediately. Those of us who lived through Bush v. Gore know that it can really drag on. But with all of this absentee ballot added to the burdens that are already there, many, many races are not going to be decided on election night. And in fact, the results may change between election night and later. And that is something that people may be intending to try to use by saying, well, we won until all those mail ballots came in. There must be mail ballot fraud. No. It just takes a longer time, and sometimes there's a difference in who uses the mail-in ballot and who doesn't. So be patient. Encourage patience. And when you talk to voters, tell them, do not let yourself get all upset if you don't have results November 3rd, that night.
Lynn, I have one question I want to be clear on.
Sure.
I understand you said on October the 2nd. Is what time on October 2nd can you hand deliver a ballot? I mean, a voter registration form?
Up until 5 p.m.
Okay. So if you are doing
usually
something,
5 p.m. for these deadlines.
okay. So, for instance, if all voter registration forms that you collect, you can still mail those up until when?
They have to be postmarked by October 5th. But again, do you really want to trust the mails for that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, but that's it. There's this rolling deadline starting October 2nd if you register in person, October 4th if you register online or by fax or email, because email is always an option. And then if you do it by mail, it has to be postmarked by October 5th. But also remember, on the absentee ballot, the postmarks don't matter in South Carolina. They have to have the ballot by 7 p.m. on November 3rd.
Okay.
So no matter what the postmark says, they have to have that ballot by 7 p.m.
I've had my hand raised for a while. I have some questions. Okay. So I got together some lawyers and the Election Commission Office and the Democratic Party after the last general election, because of course I was a direct witness at 2020 Hampton, where it took 5 hours, and it was by the way, it was handicapped people. Never did anyone that I encountered over a period of 5 hours be a person who was not handicapped, etc., who was waiting in line to vote. And so has the League of Voters taken on this problem that has occurred through many elections that absolutely is a nightmare that will be coming to 2020 Hampton Street on the day of elections? Have you been proactive in realizing that it was a 5-hour wait for?
Oh, we've been proactive in our advocacy, but we can't change their process any more than we have. We've gotten the General Assembly to change what they will change, but we don't control the Richland County Election Office. And there's a new director, and all the evidence is that new director is very, very capable. I've seen some of her work in the form of memos addressing problems, and from everything I hear from staff, from commissioners, she's very impressive, but there are a lot of problems. I mentioned early on that the e-poll books appear to be a glitch. Unless somebody finds an awful lot of money in a great hurry, the new e-poll books won't be in place. What that means is it will really slow down voting, whether it is early in person or on election day, because instead of that e-poll book marking a ballot for the right ballot for that voter, as I said, that can be complicated even within a polling place. Instead of having a system that does that automatically, they will have to, the poll workers will have to sit there and do that manually. There may be a shortage of laptops because they didn't expect to have to get new laptops. They thought they were going to have a new e-poll book system. So there are any number of technical issues that could lead to slowdowns. And we have done and continue to do everything within our power, but there are limits to what that is,
Okay, I have another question. Has the League of Voters in South Carolina looked into what has been occurring in North Carolina? That people have been reporting that only 17% of Black voters' ballots have been accepted, only 66% of Democrat ballots have been accepted in North Carolina. There's been ongoing issues, and they've been citing one of the examples as the witness signature cannot be scanned or accepted or scribbled or what. Do you know if this election commission has any issues with witness signatures like they do in North Carolina?
I have never heard of an issue like that here.
Okay.
They definitely, in fact, what the State Election Commission director has testified in General Assembly subcommittee meetings is that they have no way to check witness signatures.
Right. Okay.
If there's a signature, anything that you can call a signature there, it's a signature, that's it. Nor is there a lot of really detailed matching of signatures. In places where everybody votes by mail, some states like Washington and Oregon in particular, got FBI training on how to match signatures. Because there is a tendency in some states to be rather more picky with some folks than others. And they wanted to make sure it was very, very objective how they made their decisions. North Carolina's not done that. But we have our own problems here, but they're somewhat different than North Carolina.
Okay, and one last question is the League of Women Voters in South Carolina considered looking into states that have been quite successful, like Colorado, where your ballot is mailed to you. I worked on the Obama campaign in Colorado for a month, and easy peasy, walking up to a house, asking the person to go vote. It was legal to have them seal their ballot and hand it to you, and you dropped off certain amount of ballots in a box at a nearby location, and you continued on. That was legal.
Voters love it, and voters love it. And same thing in Oregon, but
there's no fraud.
Does the league look into this? The league is always analyzing every possible option for voting in elections. Do we have any chance of getting that in South Carolina? No. Not unless we have a complete change of the General Assembly. There is no interest in the General Assembly in going to that system. And, it produces a lot of voter satisfaction. It can be extremely secure. If you look at what is a ballot drop box for some of these states, they're not just like mailboxes. They're more like military installations. I mean, they're big.
Right.
Very immobile, they're solid.
Right.
And so, there are great systems out there. But let me tell you what is not a great system. And some people, the question always comes up, why can't we vote online? And some of you know Duncan Buell. Duncan is a league member. He's been our league expert here for many years, but he's a nationally recognized expert on voting technology. And what Duncan says about that is voting online will always increase voter turnout, probably from Eastern Europe and China and India and anywhere else they want to have a little fun with our ballots. Switzerland tried to go to straight online voting, and they were so confident of their system that they dared anyone to try to hack it. They put it online and they said, okay, do your best, folks. And a team at the University of Melbourne, led by someone named Teague, but really it's not a Teague conspiracy. We don't know her personally. Hacked it immediately, got in immediately, changed every vote in the system. And that was supposed to be the most secure system. And you hear people babble about things like blockchain. Computer experts, when you hear the words blockchain, they normally suggest that if you are threatened with blockchain, that you grab it and drown it before it can multiply. It is not respected. Unfortunately, our military in South Carolina apparently is going to be given the option of voting online this time, and we can just hope that it works out. But there is no independent, and by that I mean not working for the companies or heavily influenced by them, no independent computer experts believe that that technology is ready to go. And people always say, well, if you can bank, why can't you do that? Well, the answer is it's a very different situation. With banking, it's very important that you trace who is associated with every single thing that happens. With voting, it's very important that you not be able to trace exactly who is associated with every single thing that happens. So anyway, when you hear people say, why can't we just do it on our phone? The answer is because we'd rather just actually have honest to goodness citizens voting, not people all over the world who happen to hack into the system. Eventually, probably possible, but not now.
And this is Donna DeWitt, and thank you so much. I haven't seen you in many years,
Yeah.
but and you look good. You really do. So,
Oh, well, thank you.
so
Well, I haven't had to get out much.
No, I know. I understand that. I'm the same way. But I have a question regarding what was sent out by the U.S. Postal Service. And of course, you know, we're working very closely with APWU. Mark Demonstein is a good friend to the labor movement in South Carolina. But when people got this in the mail, they thought it was really good. And then, of course, you know, you see that there's so many different laws in different states. You know, you're trying to look at that from like get out and vote. And the other thing I want to say about the online is, you know, South Carolina is a very rural state. And you're right, a lot of people don't have access to internet. I don't think, you know, we should make it complicated for voters. You know, in countries where people have to stand in line for days to vote, is their right. And we need to make sure everybody can vote in whatever way we can. But can you address, and I was listening to NPR about that, so I wondered how in South Carolina you see the drop that the post office made, how you view that.
You know, there are states where the information on that post office mailer was simply wrong.
Yeah.
It was technically incorrect. And so some states, are not so much South Carolina, are absolutely up in arms about it. And, you know, I'm going to assume that their intentions were good. I personally love the post office. And I love like most people, you know, I think my local postman is a wonderful person who does all sorts of good stuff. But I think that was simply a mistake. They should have left it at a card saying, if you are carrying out any part of the voting process by the U.S. mails, please be aware that it takes time. Please allow time. If they had left it at that, I think it would have been simply a very positive contribution. But they did actually manage to give incorrect information for the purposes of some states. One thing I worry about is for people online is that if you look at Twitter or Facebook or somewhere, there are all these things about here's how it is, and they don't say what state that applies to. And I have now tweeted several times, for goodness sake, if you're giving advice about election process, say what state you're talking about.
Yeah,
I think states where if you change your mind, you can just walk in with your mail-in ballot to the election place and hand it to them and go ahead and vote in person. You can't do that here. You have to take it to the election office.
Yeah, the woman in Oregon was addressing some of that on NPR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, you know, there's so much information from all the states sort of jumbled together out there in social media. And that makes it worse. The fact that our General Assembly did not take seriously having everything settled well in advance is another thing that has made it very hard here. And that's, you know, that's one reason why we feel that it's important to encourage folks who can, without risk to themselves, without significant risk, take reasonable measures and vote early in person. It simply avoids a lot of the worst of this. And you may still end up in a line, but it's not likely to be as bad a line as you would be in on November 3rd.
Thank you.
Well, I think you make a good point, Lynn, in the sense that there isn't a lot of specificity when it comes to these sites talking about, hey, well, you know, here's how absentee voting works. And yet, they aren't specific as to what state you're in and what rules apply to you. But I wanted to also, I'm not sure if Pamela's question got answered in the chat. She asked, why is finding out about training for being a poll clerk or poll manager difficult?
You were breaking up there for me. I couldn't. I didn't track your.
Would you like me to
I'm
ask?
sorry.
I might
Let
have
me
a better,
try again.
I might have a better connection, Sarah. Do you want me to go ahead and ask?
Oh,
Can
I
you
think I
hear
see
me?
the question here. It's why
Yeah.
it seems to be hard to get information on being a poll clerk or poll manager.
Yes.
And that is weird. What can I say? I don't understand myself. I believe that now all but 3 counties say they do have enough poll workers lined up. And those 3 counties are Charleston, Berkeley, and Anderson. But I've heard over and over from people that, especially in Richland, that they they applied to be a poll worker and never heard back.
Yeah, my daughter wanted to do something, and I said, well, maybe you just want to be a watcher outside or something. But she's got nothing back, and I contacted Lexington County, and same thing. Not here. They're quiet.
Yeah, one thing you should be aware of, and this just changed permanently last year, and we support the league supported the bill. It is now possible to be a poll worker in an adjacent county. You don't have to necessarily be in your own. But
Wow.
we know that Richland didn't have a director for quite a period there. And for a really crucial period, did not have a director. And I suspect that had a role in the breakdown in getting back to people who were volunteering. They say they've got enough people now. We can hope that's true. But because there's going to be a lot of new technology. Apparently the state has acquired things that allow you to sign in on a pad instead of, like an iPad. There's been no training apparently on that yet. I mean, there are various problems. And of course, if the new e-poll books, if they do come in, it will be so late that I don't know how they're going to do trainings. So I suspect that we should all expect to try to have a lot of patience with our poll workers. They're going to have a tough job, and they're having to have a tough job under very difficult conditions. A lot of change procedures, not a lot of familiarity with the technology. We know the whole voting system is relatively new. Richland is telling us they're not going to have to consolidate a lot of polling places this time as they did for the primaries. That's good. I hope that's true. But if there are consolidated polling places, there's that. But everybody needs to be informed about scvotes.gov, because that site is where you're going to find the most up-to-date information. The League of Women Voters tries to get it up as soon as possible too. But there is a election fact sheet at scvotes.gov that answers a lot of questions. There is a calendar for the elections. What are all the due dates for whatever you're going to do, as well as discussion of all the processes and what you need to do, and the ability to check where your own application for a ballot, your own registration or whatever it is, if there's a problem with it.
Okay, great. I appreciate the time you spent with us. And I don't want to hold anybody too long tonight, but Lynn, thank you. The information was
Always glad to share.
Thank you.
The more we can get the information out there, the better. Exactly,
and we'll continue to try to do that. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and I appreciate it. And if anybody have any questions, mostly everybody got my phone number, email. And if anybody have any free time, they're willing to volunteer, please contact Caroline Fall. We would love to have y'all help and support.
May I ask one more, or are we out of time?
That's up to Lynn.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I wanted to say that I wanted to start helping people register to vote also. And I'm wondering who has like literature that we can have to, not just the not just the registration forms, but information about everything that you've told us on a piece of paper.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, scfolks.gov is where the most comprehensive body of information is.
I understand that, but I'm not going to be able to be online where I'm going to.
Right, and I was about to say, and even then, the fact sheet, for instance, there's not one sheet. You'd have to print out a whole book.
Okay.
So I don't know of a 1 or 2 pager, which is basically what you're saying. Because I think in part because people are in different situations. You know, if you're canvassing to get out the vote in some place where you think people really are likely to have computers, you're going to be emphasizing different things than if you're in rural Jasper County. So
But I'm not going to be in rural Jasper County. I'm just talking about something that is, if the 2 counties have this specific information.
There is, to my knowledge, no like 1 pager that just says here's.
Okay.
Richland County at the voter registration office, they do have brochures. Actually, I have some. We picked up some for our events last week. And they hand them off easily. Yeah. So you can stop by, Hardin Street, the voter registration office.
Okay.
And they have brochures that address registration, absentee, and what was the other one?
Great. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
They got a variety.
I think the main thing to be careful about, though, on those are the dates and so forth because of the.
Okay. Well, I've got my notes. So yeah. Okay. It's so weird. You have to have this by the 2nd, but then you have to have something else by the 5th, and online by the 24th. It's too much. It's very confusing.
Well, I think in part there's a good intention underlying some of it. I think the Election Commission tries to give as much time as possible for every part of it, at least as much time as the law allows. They wanted to give more time for voter registration.
Well, yeah. But then you said that voter registration, something needed to be done by October 2nd. And then you said, oh, but you can register online all the way up to the 24th. So which is it?
No. You can register online by the 4th. You have to, if you're in person, it's the 2nd of October. If it's online, it's the 4th.
The 4th.
And if you are mailing it, it has to be postmarked by the 5th. And the State Election Commission really wanted to give another week or so for registration in a change in the law this past year. But Drew McKissick and Hope Walker showed up and lobbied against it, so we did not get that.
Some things never change, Lynn.
I know.
Hope Walker, who's that?
Uh-huh.
No, who's that?
Executive Director.
Executive Director of?
The South Carolina Republican Party.
Oh.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Lynn.
All right. Again, I want to thank everybody for taking the time, and especially Lynn for all the knowledge and information she gave us. And again, we'll be doing more of these type things. Actually, we're trying to do one every Tuesday, and I'll keep everybody informed. Y'all have a good evening. I appreciate you. Thank you
So much, Lawrence. Appreciate it. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everybody. All right, have a good night.
Good night.